Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's live online webinar and book launch, Declutter Your Photo Life with author Adam Pratt. We're going to be getting started in just a minute to give participants some time to enter. In the meantime, please feel free to share with us in the chat your name and where you're tuning in from. Welcome, everyone. If you've just joined us and you're here for our live online webinar and book launch, Declutter Your Photo Life, you've come to the right place. We're going to be getting started in just a minute. While we wait for some attendees to enter, why don't you tell us your name and where you're tuning in from? All right, we may have some more participants who will be joining us while we're in progress, but we're going to get started. A couple of things to note for those of you who are here. If you have to leave early for whatever reason, we are recording this webinar. So this will be emailed to all those of you who registered, and it will also be hosted on Rocky Nook's public YouTube channel. If you have any burning questions for Adam during his live webinar, please go ahead and enter those into the Q&A function of your toolbar. At any time throughout the webinar, I will be moderating those, and we will be also having a Q&A at the end of Adam's sharing. Now for introductions, my name is Katie Walker. I'm the marketing coordinator at Rocky Nook, and I'm delighted to be here with you all today. For those of you who are unfamiliar to Rocky Nook, we are a small independent publisher local to the Bay Area in California. Rocky Nook was founded in 2006 with the goal of publishing books that would help all level photographers improve their skills to capture those moments that matter. We're very excited to host Adam as we celebrate his new book, Declutter Your Photo Life, Curating, Preserving, Organizing, and Sharing Your Photos. If you have yet to purchase Adam's book, you can buy it from Rocky Nook's online store using a coupon to save 40% off the print book, ebook, or the bundle. The coupon code you'll want to use is Declutter40, and I will put that in the chat. We ask that if you buy and use Adam's book, that you leave him a review online, as this helps us as the publisher, but also helps Adam as the author and educator. And now to introduce Adam. Adam Pratt loves people, photography, and a good story. He spent the last 25 years at the intersection of creativity and technology, including 22 years at Adobe, where he worked on the Creative Cloud team. He's a professional photo organizer, software trainer, and photographer. He's also the founder of Chaos to Memories, where he also helps people enjoy their photos again by turning their photo chaos into precious memories that they can enjoy and share. Please join me in welcoming Adam.
All right. Hey, Katie, can you see and hear me? Is everything working okay?
Don't see you yet.
Okay. Happy to give it a second.
There you are.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks, Katie, for getting us started. And thank you for the introduction. And thanks to everybody who joined us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping as a reminder. We have up to an hour scheduled. If we end early, that's okay. But I think we'll have lots to cover and some time for Q&A as well. As Katie mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A pod. I will look at that as I can, and Katie will help me wrangle those questions as we go. And we would love to be as interactive as possible with you in this format. And I even love that Katie started us with a question just to see where everybody's at. And it's awesome to see some familiar faces and names, I should say. Also interesting to see where everybody's at, literally around the world. I'm noticing all over the US, Germany, Canada, Australia. Fantastic to see everybody. And also fantastic, somebody just made a comment there that they've got a Kodak Instamatic on their shelf. Yeah, I've got a few, and there's a few hundred more where this came from, but I thought it was a fitting decoration for today. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and let me click the right button and click that off. And there we go. So I've just got a few slides to kind of narrate as we go. And the funny thing is that when we talk about decluttering your photo life, I wanted to create a title slide for this session. And I thought, you know, if I put myself in the shoes of the people who either read the book or are interested in the topic, they could be thinking of all sorts of different things. So I was trying to be a little fun, and I actually made 4 different title slides. So some of you, when you think about decluttering your photo life, you're thinking about all the gadgets. You're thinking about hard drives, old memory cards, backup drives, thumb drives, maybe CDs, DVDs, you name it. And this title slide, this one's for you. Others of you are thinking declutter your photo life means this. You have boxes and carousels of old slides that maybe you want to scan, purge, review, digitize, you know, whatever. Some of you are thinking this. It's more like prints, negatives, envelopes, and so on. And then others of you, you know, maybe it's not the gadgets. You've got the files on the computer, but they're overwhelming, and maybe they're in lots of places and you need to wrangle them better. So anyway, you can feel free to leave a comment in the chat pod. I'll be curious to see what you guys say about which one resonates with you. But we will actually be able to cover, at least briefly, kind of all of these scenarios, because when we think about decluttering your photo life, what we do at my company, Chaos to Memories, and what I wrote the book about is really about all of these scenarios. It's about digital photos, it's about prints, slides, negatives, even a little bit about video. What do we do with all of that stuff, whether they're digital video files or home movies, you know, you name it. And I think we all kind of feel overwhelmed by this, and it's just it's a universal problem. I don't know anybody who doesn't feel some concern about their photo memories. And I thought it would be helpful to start by thinking about really, why do we take photos? And these are just a few from my family photo collection from when I was much younger. But I think there's a couple reasons we take photos, and some of you might be professional photographers and you're shooting like for clients, you're shooting to make money, you're an artist, you're shooting in a way that is you know, expressing your vision of the world, expressing how you see and capturing how you see the world. But when it comes to family photos and kind of the day-to-day snapshots that kind of overwhelm most of us, I think there's a couple key themes, some key reasons why a lot of us are taking photos. On one level, it's capturing memories, right, of you, your siblings, your children, grandparents, whatever it is. There's also an aspect of photography that is telling stories, right? It's not just the photo, you know, the print or the negative or the pixels, but it's the story behind it. And then related to that story, there's also this sense of connection and relating to people. And then in a nutshell, if I had to say one quick summary of why we take photographs for most of us, I use the phrase, we do it to remember and be remembered, right? To remember and be remembered. So it may be an event or a person that we want to remember, or we want to be remembered by, you know, our children, our grandchildren, future generations. And you may have your own answers to that. If you've got them, throw them in the chat pod. I would genuinely be interested to see how people answer that question about why we take photographs. Lots of reasons. Those are a couple. And yet there is something kind of crazy going on with photography, that we're doing this because we want to connect, right? And there's a lot of interesting research, like over the last 15 years, that I've read about the value of photography, especially tangible photography. And by that, I mean like prints, you know, not just on the screen, but getting them printed in books on the wall in some way. there's a lot of compelling research about the ability for photography to help people, especially children, develop a sense of continuity, of identity, of connection and purpose. And there's also a whole lot of research going on around not just children, like you see in this stock photography shot, but also around end-of-life issues. So I have lots of friends in my circles where their parents are dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, and they're dealing with really hard things. And there's some interesting research about the ability of photography as well as music to help older people to remember, to connect. It's pretty amazing. And you guys have probably seen some of these stories and read some of this. And yet, despite all of that, we see stuff like this. This is a real screenshot. I can't even make this stuff up. This is a real screenshot from a client project that we were organizing this summer. And this is just a snapshot of it. There were hundreds of thousands of photographs, digital photographs in their family collection. And this was just one burst. And this is just one sample of it. There were literally hundreds of just completely black photos. So probably like a phone in a pocket on burst mode or something, just firing off hundreds of black photos. And the reason I show you this, and I use this in the book as well, the reason I mention this is because what this tells me is that people took these photos, and if they had ever looked at their photos again, they would have deleted these, right? Like, even if you're not a photo organizer, that's easy to do. Whatever software, phone, computer you use, select a whole bunch of black images that you took by accident and delete them. No big deal. It takes a second. However, we see this all the time. This is a real example, but we see it all the time. And what it tells us is people are taking their photos, but they're never getting around to looking at them, to curating them, you don't even have to edit them. You know, some of you love to edit and perfect your photos. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about throwing away the junk, finding the favorites, printing them, enjoying them, sharing them, even looking at them again. And we have clients who shoot regularly 20, 25, 30,000 photos a year. And if you're a professional commercial photographer or a wedding photographer, you're like, yeah, no problem. I do that all the time. But on a family level, as personal photography, that's a lot of photographs. And unless you've got a good plan, it gets overwhelming and you end up with situations like this, right? So another example that I'll show you, totally different category, is this. So we had a local client who called us and said, hey, I have a couple photos that I need organized. I'm like, okay, great. So I'm really glad I brought the minivan that night, because it took us 45 minutes to haul all of these boxes out of her basement into the minivan, had to put all the seats down, basically stacked up to the ceiling to haul this back and start to make heads or tails of this. It was tens of thousands of prints, negatives, slides, stereo realist slides, medium format, all sorts of stuff. You can see film reels, there's videotapes in another box. So this is an example of physical overwhelm with photos. And some of you may say, oh, this doesn't look so bad, this is no big deal. Some of you say, oh, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I have that and more. But whether it's digital in the first example, or whether it's physical photos as you see here, a lot of us feel overwhelmed. And I use the word overwhelmed because our clients use it. Literally, it is the #1 word that clients use when they fill out the contact form on our website. When they contact us about a project, #1 word is they feel overwhelmed. And actually, when I started my business 5 years ago, I knew the feeling of overwhelmed was common. And so I wanted to buy the domain name. I thought that would be good and kind of flexible. At the time, the price was $183,000. So I thought it was a good idea, but not that good of an idea. So I passed on the overwhelmed.com. We went with chaos2memories.com instead. But these are the kinds of projects we see. And I assume at some level this resonates with you because you're here and you're interested in this topic. Now, we help clients do this all the time. That's what the book's about. However, I am also a victim of this, right? Like, I understand this dilemma. And so I thought I'd show you just a few photographs of cameras and talk about this from the development of technology. So in the top left corner is a Minolta Weathermatic 110 camera. So it's 110 film format. It's not the best format, but I received that as a gift as a child from my aunt and uncle. It's a rugged underwater camera. I still have it. It's on the shelf in our studio. And it was a great kid camera, right? I could just beat it up. I could take it to camp. I could take it to the beach. I didn't have to worry about it. But, you know, it was a 110 camera. What I think that format's about 24 frames per roll. And it would normally take me weeks or months to shoot that whole roll, right? Like a couple at camp, a couple on summer vacation, a couple back to school, and then we'd have it developed. And so the pace of shooting was relatively slow. And then around sixth grade, I learned from my uncle more about film photography. So my mom had a Pentax K1000, like you see in the top right, and we were loading film, you know, rolling our own film, loading the camera, shooting a roll, developing it in the bathroom, making contact sheets. And we would shoot a whole roll in a day, which was kind of like crazy, right? It felt really indulgent to shoot that much film in a day. And then we go do it the next day as we were learning. Bottom left is a camera that I received from Russell Brown. If anybody knows the name Russell Preston Brown, he is the creative director at Adobe. And when my oldest son was born, Russell gave me this camera as a gift. I still have it. I love it. I don't shoot with it much, but it's a great memory. And if you have toddlers, oh my gosh, you shoot a lot of pictures of those little kids, and we just went nuts. And so sometimes instead of just like a roll of film, I might shoot 50 or 100 photos a day with this little digital camera. It was just groundbreaking. And then bottom right is a Canon Digital Rebel. I think this was around 2000 or 2001. This was the first digital SLR that came out that was under $1,000. And it was only 6.3 megapixels, which sounds silly now, but at the time it was amazing. And we got this for our family right before Christmas. We had 2 little kids in the house. And if my memory is correct, I shot 50,000 exposures with this camera in the first year. They weren't all good. I threw lots of them away, but it was a good learning time for me. And it just exploded, right? Like I could shoot so much and it was amazing. So this little history of photography for me is really the motivation for writing the book, because I have been through this experience with you. As technology has changed, our photography has changed. Maybe I should have put an iPhone on here, because that has even further expanded how much we shoot and how convenient it is. But it does mean a mountain of photos. And again, it's often pretty overwhelming. So I wrote the book because I want people to feel less overwhelmed. I want you to enjoy your photography. I want you to enjoy your images. I want you to be able to share them. I also want to avoid wasted time. There's lots of different philosophies about photo organization. We do literally millions and millions of photos every year. I feel like we've seen everything. I feel like we can tackle everything. And hopefully you can learn from our experience and learn this workflow. So the big 2 things we'll talk about are, number one, what we just did, which is the problem of cluttered photo life. And then we'll talk about our 5-step workflow, which we cover in detail in the book, but I'll take you through that. And hopefully that'll be a helpful framework for you to think about, how do I tackle this project and how do I feel less overwhelmed? So the goal, I think it's really important to have goals. Let me rewind a second here. Decluttering your photos, it can take a while. It can be a big project. And I think it's very helpful to keep your end goal in mind. Sometimes you'll get bored. Sometimes you'll get fed up. Sometimes photographs can be very emotional. Maybe they remind you of hurt or loss or disappointment, or maybe they remind you of people that you love that are no longer alive or no longer in your life. And so there's a lot of reasons that this can be difficult. And frankly, I talk to a lot of parents, a lot of even younger parents and younger moms who honestly, they feel insecure about their photography. They wonder if they did a good job taking photos of their children. Did they take enough? Are they good enough? Did they capture life? Did they take enough of the third child? Those kind of things when life gets busy. So frankly, there's some relational and even creative insecurity that can come with photography. So there's a lot there. We could talk about it more, but for all those reasons, you can get overwhelmed. You can kind of stop your process. So having the goal in mind, I think, can be helpful motivation. So for every project, I've got 4 goals. Maybe you like all of these, maybe you like some of them, but let me lay out my 4 goals. Number 1 is I want everything sorted, right? I want everything in one place. I want everything sorted. I want everything to make sense. The next one is I want them to be searchable. So sorted, we sort everything chronologically. But the other aspect of this is assigning things like keywords for important people, places, and events. And that allows me to not just browse photos, but search photos. So in this case, I could find all of my baby photos, or you could find all of the photos of the Eiffel Tower, or all of the graduation photos, or whatever it is that you're looking for in your family archive. So sorted, searchable are the first 2. And if you've got those, then number 3 happens automatically. It means they're shareable because you can find the photos and the memories that you care about, and you can share them. And you can share them in all sorts of ways. And we'll talk about some examples, but you could share them as prints, as wall art. You can put them in a photo book. You can make a slideshow when it's time for like graduation or retirement. You could post them online, whatever you want to do with them. But if they're sorted and searchable, they become shareable. And then because they're all in one place, you can also back them up and keep them secure. And here's the interesting thing. So you probably have heard this story, maybe even you've said this yourself. A lot of people say, if my house was on fire and I had to get out quickly, the one physical thing that I would get before I left would be my family photos. And yet here's the crazy thing. When we go to a client's house to like help them collect all their photos, those appointments generally last 1 to 3 hours, literally hours. And even when they've done their homework, just getting everything, putting it in boxes, getting it out of the house. And yet my neighbor, literally 3 doors down a couple of years ago, their house burned down. They had seconds. I think the statistic is like generally like 2 minutes to get out of a house when it's on fire, right? So it takes us hours to get everything out of a house when we're planning to do it. So if you're not planning to do it and everything's not safe, if there was a tragedy like a fire, a flood, a hurricane, a tornado, whatever it is, the idea that I would just run out with all my photos, it's just not realistic, right? And literally right now in the studio, we're working on 2 projects for clients that are from Florida and are the remnants of Hurricane Ian this fall. That was devastating, and we're dealing with mold and damage, and it's really hard. So to be able to do that before it gets bad is really important. So those are the 4 goals that we have in mind.
Hey,
So,
Adam.
yeah.
We do have a question that might pertain to what we're covering, and it's about network attached storage. Are we going to be touching upon that topic at all?
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that. It won't really be a big topic of this, but I would say network attached storage is a fine option. And if you're not familiar with that, it's basically like a hard drive with an Ethernet port on it. Maybe an oversimplification, but normally a hard drive you would connect to a computer. If you've got multiple computers, having a network attached storage or a NAS device, and that's what you see in this photograph. This happens to be a Synology device, and there's other brands. But if you have lots of computers that need to connect to the same archive of photos, a NAS can be really helpful. In a studio, a professional photographer, that would make a ton of sense. For the home, maybe, maybe not. It would depend on how many users and the volume. So I'd say it's a potential fit, but not for everybody. And if you have a specific scenario you want to dive deeper on, feel free to reach out and be happy to connect. Good stuff. Thanks for raising that. So those are the 4 goals that we have in mind. Hopefully some of those resonate with you. And I would just say, whatever your goals are, literally write them down. Like write down why you want to do this project, because at times you'll be frustrated. You'll be bored. You'll think it's taken forever. You'll wonder if it's worth it. I believe it's worth it. And I haven't even seen your photos, right? So write down those motivations and that'll keep you going. So let's talk about our 5 steps. And again, we talk about this in detail in the book. We take you through the whole process, but there's 5 steps that we go through with every process. It's gather, preserve, organize, share, and maintain. There's 1 or 2 comments about this before we go through each one. First is they're in order. They're in order like on purpose, right? And if you try to shortcut this or jump ahead or whatever, it's probably not going to go well. And I'll tell you a real example. We have clients come to us and they say, kind of organize and share. Like, I want you to make me a photo book, right? I want you to scan my photos and make me a beautiful photo book for like my son's 40th birthday or my husband's retirement or whatever it is. In that scenario, sharing those photos is really, really hard. It takes a ton of time because you can't find anything. So what we tell clients is, listen, I know you have that project and we want to do that project for you, but let's gather, preserve, and organize everything first. And when we do that, then the sharing, the creating prints, creating photo books, creating slideshows is so much easier, literally to the point where, we have people talk to us and they're like, yeah, I worked on this photo book for my child's graduation for months. And oh my gosh, it was crazy. Once we do the gather, preserve, and organize, we can make photo books in like an hour or two, right? Because everything's organized, it's easily accessible. So, do these in order, and things will go smoothly. So let me take you through a deep dive here in what I mean here. So gathering, if you're thinking about physical photographs, you're going to want to gather everything: prints, slides, negatives, albums, scrapbooks, framed photos, whatever it is. Literally gather all that physical media, and you're going to want to put it in a place that you can set up camp for a while, because it's not going to like be instant. So don't do the kitchen table, right? There's too much traffic, too much food and water. Maybe you commandeer the dining room table. Maybe you use a pool table or a desk or something like that, where you can physically gather everything in one place. And then if you're thinking digital, we'll talk through this briefly. If you're thinking digital photographs, you're going to want to get the computers, even the old ones, the old laptops. You're going to want to get any phones, new and old ones, and make sure they're charged, and make sure you got cords and passcodes and things like that. Maybe you've got old hard drives, thumb drives, optical discs like CDs and DVDs, memory cards of all shapes and sizes, photo apps like Apple Photos, Google Photos, Amazon Photos, and maybe you've got cloud services like Dropbox, OneDrive, and so on. And your goal here is get all of that on a big hard drive. And how big do you need? I don't know, because I don't know your photos, but it's probably going to be a lot. And here's the catch. As you gather this stuff, and it's not rocket science, it's just copying, but you want to get it all in one place. As you do this, you're not organizing. Literally, you're just gathering and copying. You're also not deduplicating. So there are going to be lots of duplicates, but you're not going to do that now. Again, you're just gathering. And then you're also not reminiscing, right? Like, I don't want to sound callous, but you gotta be efficient. You got to get through this process if you're going to make progress. So you're not reminiscing. You're not looking at every photo. You're just gathering everything together. So gathering is key because for two reasons, at least. One is you have to understand the scope of the project. So if we go back to the physical photos, if you don't know how many you've got or what formats, then it's going to be hard to know how to organize and scan them. If you want to organize your digital photos, you can't have them on 4 different devices, 3 different computers, 2 hard drives, 3 cloud accounts. Like, you just can't organize that, right? You've got to get it all together. So, so gathering is where we start every project. That's where you want to start your project. And again, there's no shortcutting this. Like, you've got to start here. You've got to gather, and as thorough as you can be, the better. So thinking about all of this, I want to pause. I've been talking a while. I want to pause, and I want to launch a couple quick polls because I would love your feedback. Let's see. I think I'm going to stop my sharing. I'm going to launch a poll. And as we think about, this process, thinking about gathering and thinking about how big this project can be, I'm going to launch a poll and ask for your feedback with 3 simple questions. The first one is, approximately how many photos are taken each year around the world? I'm curious what people think. And Katie, is that, let me know if that's coming through. I think I did it right. Yes, I'm starting to see responses. Fantastic. So the first one, just to size up the scope of the problem, right? Number 2 is, how many photos does a typical family have? Just fill in the blank, just to guess. And number 3, just for a little bit of trivia, what's the largest photo archive that we've managed in our studio at Chaos to Memories? It's not the biggest photo archive, but I'm just curious, what do people think? So we'll give folks a minute to fill that out. I see the numbers coming in. Fantastic. We'll give you a minute. It's like a little horse race. Who's winning?
Now, if you have Adam's book, you know some of the answers to these questions.
Yes, this is true. It's not a pop quiz. It's okay. You don't have to know. Just curious. Excellent. So the computer tells me like 70% of you have chimed in. That's amazing. I wish I could get 70% of my kids to cooperate this well. This is awesome. I appreciate your involvement. You could sit here and listen, and I could certainly talk, but it's fun to have you guys involved. So thank you. Fantastic. All righty. So let's just look through the numbers. The number of photos taken each year, and I know this is just an approximation. I don't know if anybody really knows the answer, but based on the research I've seen, it's approaching 2 trillion photos a year. And the crazy thing about that number is not just that it's 2 trillion, but that actually represents as many photos as were taken in about the first 150 years of photography combined, right? It's a lot of photographs. And I don't think anybody here has 2 trillion photographs, but you probably have a lot, and that's why you're here. In terms of how many photos does a typical family have? Again, this is limited sample data. It's not a global representation, but I can just share what we know from our clients. Our average client has about 10,000 physical photographs, and that's in all sorts of formats, print, slides, negatives. And then on the digital side, our average client has about 102,000 digital photographs. Some more, some less, but that's very, very common. And then the last question, the largest photo archive we've done, we worked on a project with 7.6 million digital files. I thought it was a pretty big project. And a lot of people ask us, so who was the client? Like, what university, what photo archive? And it was just a family with 4 kids, busy family, lots of sports, lots of kids, lots of travel. It was a lot of files, right? So that kind of stuff's out there. Again, just reinforces how big of a challenge this is and how overwhelming it is. And hopefully this session helps you guys get a grasp on it. So thanks for the feedback there. Hopefully those are some helpful stats. And I will close that out and we will go back to a little screen share. So with that, let's go back there. So that's the gathering part. Those are some of the numbers that you might be looking at, right? You might be looking at 10,000 physical photos. I wouldn't be surprised if you had 100,000 digital photos. So that's phase 1, getting all of that gathered. Step 2 is the preserving. And the photograph I have on my slide here is of our camera scanning rig. I've been scanning photographs for almost 30 years. I kind of used to hate it. Now I love it. And I used to hate it because it's so tedious. We use a camera scanning rig now, and it's similar to something you'd find at the Smithsonian or any museum. We're using the latest digital camera technology to get really high resolution, high quality, and high speed capture of any format. You can scan with kind of a gadget scanner or a flatbed or something like that. Unfortunately, those technologies have really not been updated in like 30 years. They're just super old. It's the same stuff that I used to use back in high school, which was a while ago. And they're also super, super slow. So it's mediocre quality, very slow. It will work if you've got lots of free time. But preserving this stuff after you've gathered it, preserving those photos, getting them scanned at high resolution, high quality is really important. And we don't have time to cover it all right now. But the other thing that I'll mention is that there's an angle of preservation for digital as well, right? So if most of your photographs are just JPEGs, fine, no problem. But we also have lots of old formats. So sometimes clients will bring us like Kodak photo CDs that need converted, or they'll have old bitmap files, which are really kind of a pain to deal with. So we'll convert those to more modern formats. On the video side, we're actually working on a project right now for a local client in Chicago. He brought us 5 terabytes of digital videos, and most of them are like Windows Media, AVI, these like old formats that are kind of a pain to view. And we're not confident that they're going to be easily viewable, years from now. So we're transcoding, or we're converting 5 terabytes of that footage all to more modern formats. And we're going straight to like MP4 digital video files, which is the same technology behind like Netflix and YouTube and Hulu, so that we've got a better chance of being able to view it now and in the future for future generations. So gather it all together and preserve it, either scanning it if they're physical photos, or converting it as needed for your born digital, your native digital files. So we gather it, we preserve it, and then the other thing that I'll mention about preservation is that I don't think the goal is preserving every photograph you've ever taken. Like, if you're an awesome photographer, don't let me stop you, but even in my professional photography experience, I threw away a lot of my photos. And I quoted Ansel Adams in the book, who said something like, 12 good photos a year is a good crop, right? So if Ansel Adams was pleased to shoot 12 amazing photographs in a year, why do I think I should keep all 25,000 that I shoot, right? They probably need some curation. So, and I talk a lot about that in the book, and that is deleting the duplicates and the duds and making some hard decisions, because, the person who dies with the most photos doesn't win. They just die with a lot of photos, and most of the next generation are going to feel overwhelmed by that, and they might just delete them, right? But if you pass on a nicely curated, sensible photo collection that highlights the highlights, it's a way more manageable thing to pass on as a legacy. So preservation, in my mind, is not only preserving, but also deleting, deduplicating, curating out the junk that you don't need to keep forever, and making that project more manageable. So those are phases 1 and 2. So there's, I forgot, I had that slide. There's the trash it if it's junk slide. And then let's talk about organization. So our system is really pretty simple that we use for every client project and recommend. And, this could be its whole webinar, but let's just talk about this. How do we organize photos? It's super simple. Number 1, we use folders, because when you have 50 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 photos, they could all be in one folder, but that's kind of crazy. So on the computer, we put them into folders and subfolders based on year. I believe strongly that because photos are a capture of a moment in time, that it makes sense to just sort them chronologically. And the other nice thing about this is it works for everybody. It doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need exceptions. It just works. So we sort them chronologically in folders and subfolders. We also add metadata. That's a technical word for like keywords and descriptions, right? People, events, places. And what the magic of this is, it allows your photos to be searchable. Folders let you browse your photos. That's better than nothing. Metadata, like keywords, lets me search for my photos. So I could find, as you see in this example, every photo of the Golden Gate Bridge, or every photo that I've taken in San Francisco, or every photo of my son, or every photo, of me, running a marathon, which is one of my hobbies, things like that. So folders, metadata, and then while we're at it, because it's so quick, we also think clear file names help even future generations of people who maybe aren't as tech savvy. So very simple file naming scheme of year, month, date, underscore with a subject, underscore with a sequence number. And that right there makes every file 3 things. 1, it makes it self-explanatory. You don't have to be a tech whiz to understand what that photo's of. It also means everything's sorted chronologically. So if I have Christmas photos from multiple years, they don't all start with Christmas. That gets confusing. And then the last thing is every photograph in your archive is unique. So it's chronological, it's sorted, chronological, self-explanatory, and unique. And it just makes things really, really simple. So obviously there's more to that. There's more work behind that. It didn't just happen at the snap of a finger. But folders combined with metadata and clear file names always works, right? It's actually a really simple system. There's probably more questions about that. Let me just wrap up the workflow and we'll spend the rest of our time on Q&A. I will say we use Adobe Lightroom Classic for all of this work. And I'll tell you why. Katie mentioned, I think Katie mentioned I worked at Adobe a long time. I worked for Adobe for 22 years. I worked on the Creative Cloud team. I worked with the Lightroom and the Photoshop teams a lot. And I use the software not because I worked at Adobe, but because it is cross-platform Mac and Windows. It's really fast, and it supports all the standards that we're talking about for metadata and file format. If you're still thinking about a system, a couple reasons why we love Lightroom are it works with scanned photos and it works with digital photos. It works with stuff from anything from like a high-end SLR, which I like to shoot with, down to your cell phone, right? And it works with just about any file format, JPEGs, RAW, movies, like all sorts of file formats, TIFFs, you name it. And it also runs, as I mentioned, on Mac and Windows. So it's a really great platform. We use it for everything. If you get something else you like, that's totally fine. But if you're looking for something, this is what we use and why we use it. The last two parts of the workflow, if you get that far, ready, this is the payoff, right? This is where the fun is, and that's sharing. When everything is safe, you've got peace of mind about it, you know where it is, you can search it and find it. Then, like in the top left there, that's a photo book that I designed for my son's graduation. We do those for clients all the time. Bottom left is some adventure photographs from some hiking and running I've done. Those were not shot all at the same time. They were shot over multiple years at multiple events. But because my whole archive is searchable, when I'm like, hey, I'm in the mood for some mountains and some beautiful blue skies, I can search up those photos, find some stuff I like, and then print those. I've got some nice mounted prints and just put them on a photo ledge. On the right, these are actually photographs that a dear friend of ours took, me and my wife, a couple summers ago. And we were able to take those photos and print them on canvas and hang them in the bedroom, right? And so there's other ways to share photos. You can just make prints and put them in an album. You can post them online. You can post them on Instagram. You can do whatever you want with them. But when people can't find their photos, they can't share them, and you might as well not have them at all, right? It's really frustrating. So this is the payoff. I love organizing, but this is the payoff. This is why it really matters, because nobody ever shows off their hard drive. Like, hey, baby, check out my hard drive of photos. That's not the exciting part. This is the exciting part. I am thrilled when people get their photographs off of their phones, out of their hard drives, out of the bins and boxes, and into their home, right? On the wall, in books, so that I can look at them, enjoy them, and share them. And hopefully you hear it in my voice. This is the part that I love the most. We get a thrill out of this. So this is a big part of the goal. And then the last thing, doesn't really get its own slide, but just a summary, is maintenance, because you're going to keep taking photos, right? So it's the same process, but it's much easier, because instead of catching up on 10 or 20 or 100 years of photography, maybe it's just a month or even a year if you don't stay on top of it, but you just revisit it. So you just do that same process. You gather your photos, you deduplicate, you purge the duds, you organize them by year, you add some keywords, you rename the files, and you just add them to your photo archive that's safe, secure, searchable, sorted, shareable, you name it. So those are the highlights. Again, there's more steps behind that. They are all in the book, I promise. But Katie mentioned this as well. I'll mention two things just coming up. In case you need to leave, I'll mention two special offers, and then we'll take the rest of the time for Q&A. So first, a special offer that Katie mentioned is we do have a great discount on the book. If you purchase the book from Rocky Nook, you can save 40% off with the code Declutter40. The cool thing about buying straight from Rocky Nook, I mean, buy your books wherever you want. I just saw my book in Barnes and Noble, and I'm grateful that they stock it. You can, buy it wherever you buy books. One of the benefits of buying from Rocky Nook that's cool is you can buy the paper version if you like that. You can buy the digital edition if you like that, or you can actually buy a bundle, and the code works on that too, which is a pretty sweet deal. So you can read it at your leisure and on the go. So kind of cool. The other thing that I'll mention is we also have a follow-up workshop to this. This is a paid event scheduled for Thursday, January 25th. It's going to be 2 hours online, and we're going to go a deeper dive into the gathering phase. That's the most overwhelming for most people. So we're going to spend an hour deep dive on gathering and identifying physical photos, different formats and so on. And then we'll spend another hour on the digital gathering side. And again, all sorts of different devices and things there. And so that'll be interactive. I think it's going to be a blast, and you're invited to bring your devices and photo formats, and we'll look at them on camera, just like today. We'll be like, what is this thing? How do I scan it? Where do I find it? All of that stuff. So that'll be phase one. If you register between now and December 8th, so you got a week to register. If you register by December 8th and you decide to join us, the early bird pricing is only $50. And then if you decide to register after that, all the way up to the January 5th event, then the price goes up to $75. So if that sounds fun, hopefully you'll join us, take advantage of the early bird pricing. And I'm sure Katie's going to put that link in the chat pod as well. So that's all my slides. Those are the special offers. I can stop screen share and see what questions we've got. There's always a bunch. Katie, any to get me started?
Adam, thank you. We have a really active chat.
Awesome.
Attendees, you have been excellent, super participants. And we have a lot of questions to get through. So if you're ready, we can jump into those.
You bet.
And attendees, just to reiterate, I have shared a link in the chat to Adam's webinar on January 5th. Okay, so this is a question from Michael. And these are in no particular order or curation because there are so many. Michael asks, do you utilize any sort of standard taxonomy structure, or do you customize your files and folders based on a person's preferred recall structure or event hierarchy?
Yeah, great question. So if you're not familiar with what he's talking about there, some people use the phrases like a taxonomy or a controlled vocabulary that says, hey, like, I want to organize my keywords like there's fruit and then there's like mangoes, apples, bananas. Like we have this very organized structure of tags. And because most of the clients that we work with are families, everybody's different. So we normally don't use like a controlled vocabulary in that way because people, some people go to vacation in Colorado, some people go on vacation to Disney World. So having all the possible vacation destinations for everybody doesn't really make sense. We really customize for the client. The one exception to that is when we are working with like corporate or like an organizational client, maybe a university or somebody with a lot of like product photography, then they might have products that belong with certain brands and categories. In that case, if it's like product photography or related to an organization, it could make sense to use a more controlled vocabulary. But when it comes to family photos, honestly, we just kind of feel it out and see what emerges.
Okay, this question is from Harvey. A big problem for me is the deduplication from multiple backup drives. Being a programmer, none of the software really describes what they consider a duplicate. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so deduplication sounds so easy, but it's not. Like, because there are exact technical duplicates and then there are derivatives and there's like the original and a low res version, like all of these things, maybe an original and then one where the date got messed up, all sorts of stuff. So I actually go through that in detail in the book. There's lots of different deduplication apps. I'm fond of one called Dupe Guru. It is free, fast, and cross-platform. And one bit of advice generally about deduplication is do not expect to do it in one pass and do not expect it to be perfect. So do a couple passes, right? Do it with different criteria. It's like a comb. You'll go through a coarse pass, a more detailed pass, and then a fine pass. And even after, we've had clients where we've deleted like 300,000 duplicates. And then we still find more. You're like, how are there still more? There's always more. So be patient with it. And I think the deduplication workflow in the book might be helpful for you as well.
Great. You may have answered this already, but someone asks, do you establish criteria for what to throw away or what not to scan?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the beginning of every project, when it comes to scanning, we review with the client, do you want to scan everything, or are there certain things you want to skip? So if a client wants to skip photos in the scanning process, what we do is say, like in an envelope, if they want to review them, take the photos. And if you don't want us to scan them, turn them around. And that's really important because we don't want them to like pull them out. If they're going to throw them away, throw them away. But if they want to keep them and not scan them, we have them turn them around in the envelopes or batches. And that way we know not to scan them, but they're not taking them out and adding to the clutter, right? Like that doesn't really help. Maybe when they want to save money and not scan everything. So just flip them around. And then on the digital photos where we're doing curation of their digital files, at the beginning of every client meeting, we absolutely have a pretty intense talk about what are your priorities. Do you want to keep photos of every breakfast you've had on every vacation? Or maybe not? Or do you want to keep all 4,000 selfies that your toddler took while you were waiting in line? Maybe not, right? Or maybe they do, like it's up to them. So we've got about 10 different categories of photos, 10 or 12 that we review with the client, and we ask them, do you want to keep it? Do you want to delete it? Or do you want to isolate it? So sometimes isolation is helpful. Like, hey, over the years, I've taken a bunch of photos of like my passport, my driver's license. That could be helpful to have digitally, but I don't necessarily want it in my family archive, right? So those are the kind of conversations we have with clients, and you could think through the same thing for yourself as you review your own photos.
Right. This is another question about what to store from Ray. What about raw files? Do you store those too?
Yeah, great question. So if you're not familiar with raw files, they are a very high quality file from better digital cameras. As a professional photographer, I always shoot raw. Some people shoot raw by accident and don't realize it. And if that's you, then you might want to just convert to JPEG and not worry about it. And I'm not going to try to convince, one way or the other. But one of the things I always do with my own photographs, and I recommend this to like more serious photographers who are shooting raw, is we really are big advocates of the DNG format. It's digital negative. And that's kind of a part of the digital preservation process. And we talk about that in the book. So with the DNG format, you can use something like Adobe Lightroom or the free Adobe DNG converter, and it converts your raw files to DNG. It makes them smaller, but it doesn't lose any quality. It makes them more compatible for the future. It makes all metadata embeddable in the file, so you don't have any of those XMP sidecar files. And generally, the file savings are about 10 to 30% on like Nikon and Canon files. If you're shooting Sony alpha cameras, I don't know what's up with their file sizes and formats, but generally you can save about 70% on the Sony files. So if you're thinking about storage, compression, long-term savings, that's how we approach it. You could consider that.
Christopher asks, I have many scanned images of old family pictures, cabinet cards, ambrotypes, etc., where the date cannot be determined and only guessed, maybe to the decade. How do you name these files?
Yeah, great question. So it's a super common question. It's really smart. So what we do, and your question illustrates it perfectly. I'm confident that we can almost always estimate the capture time of a photo at least to the decade, right? Especially like in the late 1800s, gets a little squishy. I am super comfortable taking those photos and putting them in a folder called 1880s miscellaneous, right? It's chronological. It might not be perfect, but it's chronological. And back in the 1880s, we didn't have a lot of photographs, right? So it's not like among tens of thousands, they're going to get lost. There's probably not a lot. So put them in an 1880s miscellaneous folder. I think that's totally fine. And if you're going to redate them, we like doing that with software, so they sort chronologically. You can just put them like January 1st, 1880. It's not perfect, but it's gonna kind of make sense. And if for some reason at some point you find out more details about that photograph and you can improve the specificity, go for it. But that normally works really well for us.
Okay, so we haven't stumped you yet, but we still have 10 more minutes and a lot of questions to get through. So we'll keep trying. Nestor asks, do you have any experience with Shotwell, Digicam, or other related software and lineups? Or any recommendation for photo organizer, tagger, etc. in that platform?
Yeah, so good question. I am not a Linux user. I'm primarily a Mac user, but also been using Windows and all the way back to DOS for decades. I don't have recommendations on that platform. What I will say is I can talk about criteria, right? So probably the two biggest recommendations I've got as you consider your options would be, one is I think it's really helpful to continue to have ongoing access to your files, right? And if you're a Linux user, that probably resonates with you, right? Like, I don't want them buried in some like proprietary catalog or database. It's one of the reasons we use Lightroom Classic. It uses a catalog, but all my files are just on my hard drive. And then the other thing that I think is important is industry standard metadata, right? Like I've been organizing digital assets literally for decades, scanning for almost 30 years. The stuff I did decades ago is still completely accessible, completely searchable. So, just make sure industry standard like IPTC metadata embedded in the files. You kind of can't go wrong, because if you change software, you change platforms in the future, all of your work is retained. You don't lose anything.
Great. We have two questions from an attendee, Anissa. I'll ask those in two parts. She asks first, what tools are you using to do those massive video conversion projects? Do you write custom automation scripts or macros to help with that process?
Yeah, great question. So we do two things. We're literally running a big one today. We use a software called a Better Finder Renamer. It's often known as ABFR. It's, if you know it, you know it. It's a Mac utility. There's also a Windows version called a Better File Renamer. And it's just a batch rename utility. It doesn't sound very sexy. And I don't think I cover it in the book. Maybe I do. I can't remember if it's in the book, but it's just a great little rename utility that helps you manipulate files in batch, thousands and thousands of files very quickly. And that's just for renaming with dates and things like that. Taking capture dates and putting it in file names, things like that. And then for all of the video transcoding, which is kind of a technical word for like converting video, we use Adobe Media Encoder. It works really, really well. It's cross-platform, it's fast, it handles like any video format, and it does batch conversion. So literally I've got like 3,000 videos running at the studio right now. While I do this, it's working for me. So that's what we use. It's fantastic.
Great. Okay. Her follow-up question or additional question is, do you have recommendations for organizations and websites that accept photo content that might have some historical or cultural significance for record keeping?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I have friends that work in museums and archives, and I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but normally when archivists get those kind of requests, they kind of roll their eyes, kind of like, oh yeah, everybody's got something famous and historical. Maybe you really do, right? So I don't mean to be dismissive, but I will say that a lot of people think they have something special that's not. So what I'll say is, don't just submit it without any warning. Don't just leave it on their porch or their front step, because they might just throw it away. If you do feel like you've got something valuable, just make a connection, reach out, talk to a human, and make your offer. It's very generous of you, but make sure it's genuinely valuable to them.
Right. Lewis asks, do you use Lightroom cloud version Sensei feature that can use AI to search for specific types of photos, minimizing metadata creation?
Yeah, good question. So we don't use the Lightroom Cloud Edition. We use the Lightroom Classic Desktop Edition of the software. It does not have the Sensei, which is Adobe's branded artificial intelligence technology for auto tagging. It is brilliant. It's pretty interesting. However, there's two challenges, kind of two limitations that I think are problematic. One is that AI is better than it used to be, but it's still not as good as me. So we want it to be accurate. The other thing is Lightroom, the Cloud Edition, only stores those tags in the cloud. It does not embed them in the files. And that is really not aligned with industry best practices for metadata and long-term archives. So we want to do the work right, and we want to make sure it's permanent. So we do everything in Adobe Lightroom Classic.
Got it. Okay. So we've got about 5 more minutes, still lots of questions. So we're going to try to get through as many more as we can. Mark asks, for photos with notes on the back, what do you do with that information?
Yeah, so We use a system called the Easy Index Scanning Workflow. It's a workflow that a friend and I created. We have a course on it on our website if anybody wants to dive deeper, but we have a system where basically we keep everything that we have physically and everything that we have scanned all matched up. So we can always match it back. And it does two things. It helps us create a chronological archive of everything that we scan. We use the computer to help us do that. And then after we've scanned everything, we can go back, and if there are notes on the edges of the pictures, on the back of the pictures, if there are date stamps on the edge of the slide mount, things like that, then we would transfer that information into typed searchable metadata in the files. And some of you might say, well, why didn't you just do that as you go? You could do that. We have found, though, after a lot of experience, it's more efficient to just scan everything, get that done, and then go do the metadata versus scan, type. The going back and forth between tasks is just hard on the human brain. So we do all of our scanning, then all of our metadata as needed.
Okay. Raphael asks, any thoughts about hard drives that have failed but were kept because I believe the files could be salvaged by savvy techs?
Yes, you might be right. Savvy techs can be costly. So we have partnered with Drive Savers. Many of you probably know that name. There may be others out there, but we partner with and recommend Drive Savers. If you've got an old dead drive that you're still holding out hope for, if you've got that and some money, send it to them. They will give you a free estimate on whether they can recover that data, and then you can decide if it's worth it. The one thing I will say is the best thing for a hard drive is to be used, right? It's kind of like a car. If you don't drive a car all year, it's probably not going to start when you get back to it. And a hard drive that doesn't get used and spun is going to have problems long term. So if you're going to do it, I would say go for it. Don't wait. Today's your best option.
Got it. Renee asks, what's the typical cost of scanning slides? Is it a cost per slide? And how long does it take to do a project with 1,000 slides?
Yeah, so whether you scan it yourself or you work with a trusted expert to scan it, we charge per slide or per scan, and most companies do. If you work with somebody to do that, most people charge per piece for scanning, and then the length of time really depends on how much you've got. So in your case, if you've got 1,000 slides or 1,000 photos, we're very efficient at it. We literally just did a project yesterday that was a post-hurricane project. It was more than just scanning. It was a lot of delicate cleaning and stuff. That was 1,450 images, and we did that in a day. And that was a little bit slower than average, right? So it varies, and it depends on who you work with.
Great. Last question is about negatives. If you have photos and they're negatives, which is best to use for scanning to gather photos in a library?
Yes, this is my favorite question. I like all of them, but this is a great question. I should have had a slide ready for it. But if you have the print and the negative, almost all the time, I would say scan the negative. Unless it's like very damaged for some reason. The negative is the original capture. It is generally going to be higher quality, better color. You're going to get a higher resolution scan off of it. Most people don't realize when they had a negative, and if they just took it to a drugstore or a photo lab, for them to do it really quickly and efficiently, a lot of times they crop off 10 or 15% of your photo. You wouldn't even see the edges. So if you do a good archival scan like we do of that negative, you are probably going to see more of your image than you ever even knew existed. It's going to be way better quality. And then the last thing I'll say is for the people who don't have their negatives, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. If all you have is the print, scan your print. That's what you have. That will do, and you can still get a good scan out of it. But if you have the choice, and it may be more expensive, but do the negative because I think it's better to do it right than do it twice. So do it right the first time, get the best scan out of it.
Wow. That was a marathon of information, but there's still a lot more. And I just want to thank you again, Adam, for joining us, for writing this book. We are so glad to have published it and to be providing it to everybody. We want to encourage participants, if you found this at all useful or informational, please check out Adam's event in January. It's a great time to get started with a new project, getting started on decluttering your photo library. So there is a link to that, and that will be also emailed. A lot of appreciation in the chat from attendees. So Adam, any last words or any other remarks about where people can find you online?
Yeah, so they can visit our website. It's chaos2memories.com, and you can learn about our work. We do offer more like detailed training and one-on-one coaching if you need a little bit of help. The one thing that I'll say briefly that I mentioned in the book is, in addition to photo organizing, I also run ultra marathons. I'm planning a 350-mile run for next July, and that sounds crazy to people, but the reason I mention it is it's very relevant to photographs and organizing. These are big projects. They can feel overwhelming. You do not have to do it all at once. I just want to encourage you to start. Just take that first step, walk that first mile, and I hope this session and maybe the book will give you a framework that feels a little less overwhelming to get started.
Wow. Thanks, Adam. Don't wait till the new year, folks. Start now.
Yeah, cool. Thank you all.
Thank you all and take care.